Welcome, you're on the Fringe show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to navigate the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here we discuss technology, startups, and mental models of successful people so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. The World Economic Forum has recently announced a new initiative, and I was paying attention to it because it's about bringing together leading voices in the private sector, civil society, academia, and politicians to define the parameters of economically safe, as they call it, interoperable and inclusive metaverse. At the same time, the WEF is also transplanting, or seem to be transplanting, its stakeholder model principles onto the metaverse. The WEF, of course, is an influential think tank, and this is one of the reasons I was so interested in it and influenced by what they're saying and paying attention. So the question that I'm asking here in this show, well, what are the reasons behind this initiative? Let's look at it in a bit more detail. It's episode 46, and before I go any further, I want to have my usual disclaimer. The views that express on this show are my own opinions. They are not the official views of organizations or employers that I'm associated with. So let's get started, and we'll start with what stakeholder capitalism actually is. And I'm particularly drawing on that book by Klaus Schwab, Stakeholder Capitalism. It's written in 2021, so quite fresh. They start with saying that the world currently knows two prevalent competing economic systems: shareholder capitalism, which is dominant in the United States and most of the West, and then we have state capitalism, which is championed by China and is gaining popularity in many other emerging markets. And their view is that they left us, these two varieties of capitalism, left us with a world that's more prosperous than before. So he's quite optimistic and positive about it. But there are also problems with shareholder capitalism and state capitalism. In both of those variants of capitalism, the dominance of one stakeholder over the other is the system's greatest flaw, according to him. In shareholder capitalism, shareholders' aims are often the singular focus. In state capitalism, the government wields too much power, according to Schwab. It's almost a direct quote here. So they advocate, him and his colleague, Peter Vanham, who co-written the book, advocate for a different type of capitalism, stakeholder capitalism. It is capitalism, as they say, in the traditional definition of the world. It's about individuals and private companies that make up the largest share of the economy. And that is a requirement for sustained economic system, private individuals and companies being able to innovate and compete freely, as it unleashes the creative energy and work ethic of most people and society. The economic activities of such private actors, according to Schwab, must also be protected and guided to ensure the overall direction of economic development, which is beneficial to society, and no actor can free ride on the efforts of others. Now, this model, according to them, is fundamentally global in nature and ensures that capitalism survives and thrives in the current era of course, of these threats that we're facing, risks like climate change, globalization, and digitization. So who are the participants in this stakeholder model of capitalism? Firstly, the natural participants, the natural stakeholders are people and planet, and they are at the center of this stakeholder model. The other four stakeholders are companies, and they all have their own primary objectives. Companies are SMEs, micro enterprises, MNCs. They pursue profits and seek, according to them, long-term value creation. Then there is civil society with unions, NGOs, schools, universities, clubs, and so on. And their primary aim is reflected in the organization's purpose and mission. Governments are the third stakeholder of countries, states, local communities. They pursue equitable prosperity. And finally, the international community, the supranational organizations like the UN and WTO and OECD, they work towards peace. So my take from this is WEF, being a supranational organization, must be wanting peace, and that's their primary aim. In the stakeholder model, they go further on. All of these groups are interconnected, and one cannot succeed if the others fail. But the authors are very quick also to point out that there are rising inequalities as a result of globalization, with a handful of big tech companies, some of them worth more than $1 trillion, dominating global markets. And to give meaning to the stakeholder model as organizing principle, they're saying we must first make sure every stakeholder gets a seat at each table that concerns her. I personally have a hard time to imagine how every single stakeholder in a company will sit down and bargain for added value, or rather distribution of the added value that this same company has created. And this value is typically crystallized in the form of goods and services that we as consumers buy. Plus, there is no really private ownership or property rights in the company for these stakeholders. They're not owners. Most of them aren't. They're just stakeholders. So they also talk about different stakeholder capitalism metrics to track progress, because arguably as time is running out, we do need new metrics. And for companies, these metrics are ESG, which most of you business people would have heard. These are environment, social, and governance metrics. So to me, this stakeholder model is clearly pitched as an antidote and an alternative to the neoliberalist ideology that is arguably the stakeholder model, arguably more virtuous than the neoliberalist ideology and system. I want to make a couple of comments before we go into the metaverse itself and the initiative. And I'm not going to critique here the stakeholder model or the fourth industrial revolution. It's just a couple of observations that I'm going to make. By the way, this critique has been done by others in a brilliant way. So what they're arguing in this book, and this is how they start, that the GDP growth as a measure of progress, of development, has become an all-consuming goal, and Schwab is pointing out the flaws of this measure and advocates for new ones like the ECG for the business world, for example. He's right to say that we see declining productivity growth, and his own numbers are that since 2007-2009 financial crisis, the US productivity growth has fallen to the meager level of 1.3%. And yes, indeed, if you look at the 21st century, labor productivity fell, according to some analysts, up to 0.4%. If we want to compare that to the first industrial revolution, the growth there was anything like 2%, and that was based on coal, just to remind you, the 2% growth of labor productivity per annum, and that lasted for approximately 50 to 60 years, right? So my second concern is that the very idea of the fourth industrial revolution, as advocated by Schwab, has got no meaning because GDP and labor productivity fall. So there is no revolution, as every revolution must result in some form of development, of progress, of some form of increase in labor productivity. That's the name of the revolution, really. Plus, I think that industrial is a misnomer as well, because digitization and the internet have changed not the real productive economy, but the exchange economy. And that it has changed the financial sector, the marketing sector, and the advertising sector. And currently what we see, if you look at the S&P 500, anything between 85 to 90% of assets of these companies are non-material. So when he was pressed, Schwab, when he was pressed, what's so special about the fourth industrial revolution, which is neither industrial nor revolution? He said that in the previous three revolutions, you, the human, created things. In the fourth industrial revolution, what will happen? It will change you, in some cases forcibly. So if you're thinking about biotech, digitization, human genome change, these are some of the technologies that are associated with this change to you. Now, after we understand the stakeholder model and what it actually brings and what the Industrial Revolution is all about, that the book talks about as well, let's look at the specific initiative into the metaverse that the web has recently announced. Again, just to emphasize what they're doing is trying to bring together leading voices from the private sector, the civil society, academia, and politicians to define what will be the parameters of a new metaverse. It has to be obviously economically viable, interoperable, it has to be safe, and focusing on two key areas: governance and economic and social value creation. So you can see very clearly how they're trying to transplant the metrics for stakeholder model into the metaverse. This initiative was launched very recently at the annual meeting in Davos in 2022, and it was called Defining and Building the Metaverse. Just quoted some material from their website. It's the world's foremost multi-stakeholder initiative to develop and share actionable strategies for creating and governing the metaverse. Members, according to them, have committed to recommending governance frameworks for an interoperable and safe metaverse and providing a space for global leaders in industry, civil society, and government. The initiative will share and accelerate insights and solutions that will bring the metaverse to life. Members who will join this initiative will play a vital role in defining and building the metaverse. They said that there will be three technologies that underlie the metaverse as we know it. It will be shaped by, firstly, in the nearest future, by virtual reality, then augmented reality, and brain-computer interface, BCI. There are lots of technology companies that have jumped on board, and not surprisingly, it's Apple, Google, Meta, it's Microsoft, Niantic, and Valve. They're all developing technologies to shape the future of the metaverse. So what are the visions of the metaverse? And they're quite right to point out that the visions of the metaverse differ. At this point in time, in today's metaverse, it's a virtual reality. They see it as the digital escape. That's what we have today. And this vision, they're very kind of specific to pointed out, distinguishes indeed between our digital and physical selves. Virtual reality will only be replaced or will only replace certain aspects of our physical reality, but not all of it. And they're right in emphasizing there are two camps at the moment. On the one hand, we have one camp from producers, content manufacturers, VR device manufacturers, and so on, that want to build the metaverse that will replicate and even reinforce the walled gardens that exist already in the internet space. These are distinct, closed ecosystems that are controlled by the operator. Think about Meta or Facebook, think about Apple, and so on and so forth. right? These are very much closed metaverses. But there is, of course, another camp of that I talk about quite in a bit of detail on this channel that are advocates of Web3. It's open metaverse. They believe that the metaverse acts as a counterbalance to the power led by large technology companies. It should be an opportunity to decentralize the experience, decentralize control, and also monetize the internet in favor of creators or citizens and owners of social networks on the internet in the Web3 space, which is different from what the Web2 companies are doing. So that's the short kind of term vision, which is right now. In the near term, the metaverse, according to them, will be augmented reality to enhance but not replace, they're stressing this again, the human experience. And in the long term, this is where it gets really interesting, at least to me. The long-term metaverse will be about brain-computer interfaces. That's the final platform, as they say. And perhaps that's the most far-reaching vision for the metaverse, including these brain-computer interfaces, BCIs. All model of mixed reality today, they say, rely on screens and traditional control systems, even if some devices have also worked with the senses of touch and smell. BCI aims to replace these screens and physical hardware entirely. Technologies such as Neuralink, they say, requires neurosurgery to implant devices in the brain, an idea that simultaneously intrigues and discourages many potential consumers. So the way I read it, that's kind of the fourth industrial revolution in full swing. It will change you. You will not do things to change the technologies themselves or production or exchange. What are executives thinking about the opportunities in the metaverse? And these are the executives that take part in this big project. If you're an executive, this is what they're thinking. Right now, just let me see what they're saying. For them, for some of them, it's an entirely new precedent for work and collaboration. And in fact, if you look at some of the articles on their website, what you'll see that at Accenture, and it's a new development, 150,000 new hires will spend their first day at work in the metaverse. So that's for training, socialization. Okay, let's see how it goes. It would be an interesting development to watch. Some other executives are thinking about completely novel digital assets that will start to emerge. Others are saying that it's a key task for humanity this decade. That's according to Arthur Sitchoff, from the CEO of Somnium Space. And I would like to quote him, actually, because that's quite a full-on statement, according to me. Forming a strong foundation for metaverse development is one of the key tasks humanity has to fulfill this decade. The concept of interoperability is what we want to develop further, and would like to see decentralized solutions to make sure that users have technical abilities to move freely between virtual reality worlds while keeping their digital identities and belongings truly theirs. So it's a very audacious future, but I don't think that these are the problems that actually humanity needs to solve these decades. There are more urgent ones than that. Some of them, that's from Nick Clegg, the president for Global Affairs Meta Platforms, a positive force for inclusion and equity. They're hoping that the metaverse will produce exponential growth in content and commercial activity, and that's according to a senior executive from HTC Via. They say our vision of the metaverse is a world where technology fades to the background, and they're also saying that they're all their innovations that they're currently doing is focused on enabling, expanding, or enhancing the experience available in the metaverse. So they're working with thousands of content developers to bring good, meaningful content to the metaverse. So it's really, really big. Why executives are so excited? And one of the reasons is very obvious, and it's also very, very clear. Businesses and consumers, and that's coming from McKinsey. It's a very recent report. You can also find some reference to this report on the website, although not the full report. Businesses and consumers, they're saying the global spending related to the metaverse could reach 5 trillion by 2030. That's according to the new report. They also done a survey of survey respondents. 79% of them, according to McKinsey, said that they have already made a purchase in the metaverse. I find these figures a little bit bit on the high side, because there are other surveys that emphasize that consumers don't really understand what the metaverse is, but let's keep with that. E-commerce in the metaverse, they say further, will comprise some 2 trillion to 2.6 trillion of the total, while virtual advertising endeavors will make up another 144 billion to 206 billion. By comparison, spending around AI totaled 93 billion last year. Clearly, McKinsey see it as a big opportunity and in the metaverse, economic opportunity. But then I think there is something else that they are trying to do with all this initiative. And the insight for that came to me from Shoshana Zuboff, Professor Zuboff, who is Professor Emerita at Harvard University. She has recently written a very interesting book, and which is very competently written, very engaging, and very well researched. It's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And according to her, we are moving into this age of surveillance capitalism. And to me, when I read what she's got to say and what the web is trying to do and trying to think about the metaverse and where it's all going, I think that the metaverse is creating a new market, and that's human beings' behavior itself becomes a market. This is what Professor Zuboff is saying. Surveillance capitalist interests have shifted from using automated machine processes to know about your behavior or our behavior to using machine processes to shape your behavior according to their interests. In other words, they've moved from automating information flows about you to automating you. And this is very consistent with what Schwab is saying and his philosophy about the fourth industrial revolution. It's about you being changed in the process. A question that you could ask if you're a normal human being like myself, well, how is this possible? Why are we falling into this trap? Well, will we fall into a trap with a metaverse? And in her book, by the way, she's given around 16 reasons or so why kind of humanity, why we got sucked into this techno imperialism or techno-capitalism, if you want to call it, or surveillance capitalism, as you call it. And I won't go through any of these 16 traps, but some of them ring a lot of, really very consistent with what I'm thinking about these traps, and I see them on a daily basis as well. The first one, in my view, it's number 16, number 10, sorry, in hers, is authority. Many of us regard all these corporations and the leaders as big authorities and experts on the future. So they kind of perceived as almost like geniuses that see a lot farther than us. And it's very easy for us, for that reason, to fall prey to this bias, because the companies are successful, so they must be right. And as a result, many of us are respectful of these leaders' expert status, and they are eager to participate in innovations that sort of anticipate the future. There is another trap as well. The trap is that there are no alternatives, or what she calls the dictatorship of no alternatives. And it's full force right here. From apps to devices, it's becoming more and more difficult for us human beings to escape, let alone find any genuine alternatives to these tools. Then what she's saying, there is a sense of inevitability, or what she calls inevitabilism. We've fallen prey to the inevitabilist rhetoric. There's only one alternative, they're saying, so we kind of have this, in a way, we fall into this sense of helplessness. And finally, which was interesting to me, is ignorance, because surveillance capitalists know things that we cannot know, and this asymmetric division of knowledge is amplified by our scarcity of time and resources. And this reminds me very much of Harari's thesis in Homo Deus, where there will be two classes of humans, Homo Deus and the rest of us, and Homo Deus, the amplified ones, the humanly enhanced ones, will possess all the knowledge to probably control the rest of us, right? But I want to finish this show on a very positive note. Firstly, I want to say that I'm not anti-tech. I'm all pro-tech. I can see useful applications in the metaverse. For example, new product development can be done very efficiently. You can show the products that are being developed to consumers to have a view on them straight in the metaverse. That will be relatively easy and very effective. Training for pilots, for doctors. I see virtual art galleries as a great example, great application in the metaverse. But I do have my own reservations. And I want to express these reservations, and probably a way forward as well. We live in a capitalist system, I believe, or rather post-capitalist system, as many would say, where all the rents have been extracted, both at the core and at the periphery in the physical world. Globalization today is a non-event. Space is difficult, and we need a lot more progress and funding in fundamental science to make this happen, and this is not happening simply. The next frontier, obviously, and not surprisingly, is the virtual world, the metaverse. So that's the next battle for capitalism. The problem that we have in the Western capitalist system, that we have run out of visions, compelling visions of the future. Okay, we have stakeholder capitalism, we have microchipping and AI and dehumanization, rainbow philosophies and de-identification, two classes of humans, and so on and so forth. We do need a better vision. And I'm hoping that this vision will emerge soon as possible. This whole inevitabilism trap that we've all fallen to, according to Zuboff, we're helpless, we can't do anything about these quick advances of digital technology that's sucking us into the metaverse, and of course we can do something about it. Let's remind ourselves, and I remind myself of that every single day, that future is not singular. It's not what everybody else is telling us what it will be like. There are options and alternatives. It's up to us human beings to shape this future, and it's up to us to impose this future and this vision on the world. I'm glad to say that not everyone is buying it, including executives of tech companies that are part of this project. And let me just cite a quote from John Hanke, who is the CEO of tech company Niantic. He said, a lot of people are talking about the metaverse these days. Coming of 18 months of Zoom, Netflix and DoorDash, you can count me out, at least in the form that most folks are imagining. he wrote in a recent blog. He argued that digital technology shouldn't compete with physical reality and that most people don't enjoy prolonged experiences inside virtual worlds. He's actually right, it can give you a headache after 30 minutes. And according to Henke, the metaverse should improve rather than replace human experience. And I'm all for it. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Thank you for joining. I'm glad that you've made some time. I will see your comments later on. I can see a couple of comments there. And once again, thank you for joining. And you will see me again at 2 p.m. Dubai time next Friday. Now time for some music.